After 6 years of night classes while working full-time, I finally got accepted into medical school. When I told my parents, my mother snapped, "You're turning it down. Your brother needs you to co-sign his restaurant loan, not go play doctor." 6 years. That's how long I sat in the back row of night classes at the community college 3 towns over, still in my scrubs from a 12-hour shift, eating a protein bar for dinner because the cafeteria closed at 6. 6 years of organic chemistry on Tuesday nights and physics on Thursdays, of falling asleep with a highlighter still in my hand, of missing 2 weddings and a cousin's baby shower because I had an exam the next morning. I was 31 years old, working full-time as a phlebotomist at Grandview Medical Center, pulling doubles whenever I could get them, and studying for the MCAT in the supply closet during my lunch breaks because it was the only quiet room in the building. I still remember the exact chair I sat in for most of those 6 years. 3rd row, 2nd seat from the aisle, in room 214 at Sinclair Community College because the radiator under that seat actually worked and the ones by the window didn't. I remember doing flashcards for the amino acids at red lights on my drive home at 9:40 p.m., 3 nights a week. And I remember the one December when I worked a double on Christmas Eve because holiday pay was time and a half and I was $100 short for the MCAT prep course I'd already registered for. I took the exam twice. The first time I scored a 502, decent but not competitive enough for the schools I wanted. I retook it 14 months later, after another year of night classes stacked on top of full-time work, and scored a 514. My advisor at Sinclair, a retired nurse named Judith Okafor, who ran the pre-med mentoring program out of a converted supply closet, told me that was the kind of jump she saw maybe once every 2 or 3 years among her students. I taped both score reports inside the front cover of my anatomy notebook, side by side, so I'd remember what 14 extra months of exhaustion had actually bought me. On a Tuesday in March, I got the email. Subject line, admissions decision, Wright State, Boonshoft School of Medicine. I read it standing in the Grandview parking lot at 6:47 in the morning, still in my car, engine running. I'd been accepted. Full acceptance, conditional on my final semester grades, with a partial scholarship covering $14,000 of the $52,000 first-year tuition. I sat there and cried into my steering wheel for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably closer to 2, because a coworker knocked on my window to ask if I was okay. I called my mother that night. I wanted to tell her in person, but I couldn't wait. So I drove to my parents' house in Kettering with a bottle of the sparkling cider my mom liked because she doesn't drink, and I set it on the kitchen counter like it was champagne. My dad, Walter, was watching the Reds game in the next room. My mother, Marjorie, was at the stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled like her chicken paprikash, wooden spoon in hand. I got in, I said. Wright State, med school. I start in August. She didn't turn around right away. She kept stirring, 3 more slow circles, and then she set the spoon down on the little ceramic rest shaped like a strawberry that sat next to that stove since I was in 3rd grade. She turned around and looked at me, and I remember thinking her face didn't look surprised. It looked tired, the way it gets when she's about to say something she's already decided. "You're turning it down," she said, not a question. I laughed. Actually laughed because I thought she was joking, the way she sometimes is with a flat delivery that takes a second to land. "Turning it down? Mom, I've been working toward this for 6 years. Your brother needs you to co-sign his restaurant loan," she said, not go play doctor. I want to describe exactly how those words sat in the room.
Sorry to interrupt. Real quick before the story continues. If this story hit close to home, here's the thing. Most people don't figure this stuff out until years later, after it's already cost them something. I put together the manipulation playbook so you don't have to learn it the hard way. 49 patterns, real examples, and exactly what to do the moment you spot one. It's already helped hundreds of people see clearly what took me years to figure out. Links in the description. Okay, back to what happened.
Because I've replayed them probably 400 times since. Play doctor. Like it was a costume. Like 6 years of night classes and blood draws and physics exams taken on 3 hours of sleep was a hobby I'd get bored of. Callum's loan, I repeated. The restaurant thing. The First Meridian loan officer needs a co-signer with a strong credit profile, my mother said, like she'd rehearsed it, like this was a business meeting and not my kitchen. Callum's credit isn't where it needs to be after the divorce. Yours is excellent. You've never even carried a balance. This is $340,000, Noelle. This is your brother's whole future. And medical school is mine, I said. My father hadn't come in from the living room. I could hear the game still playing, the announcer's voice rising and falling, and I remember being furious that he didn't even get up. "Nobody's saying don't go to school eventually," my mother said, in the voice she uses when she wants to sound reasonable. "But this loan closes in 6 weeks. Wright State will still be there next year, or the year after. Callum has one shot at this space on Wyoming Street. The lease won't wait." I stood in that kitchen holding a bottle of sparkling cider I never opened, and I understood, in a way I hadn't fully let myself understand before, that in my mother's math, my acceptance letter was a scheduling inconvenience, and my brother's restaurant was a family emergency. I didn't sign anything that night. I said I needed to think about it, which was a lie. There was nothing to think about. But I said it because I still, even then, wanted to leave room for this to somehow turn into a conversation where my mother apologized and asked to see the acceptance letter. That conversation never happened. Not that night, not for a long time after. I didn't sleep. I lay next to my fiancé Theo in the dark at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling fan doing its slow rotation, and I told him what she'd said, word for word, the way I'd already memorized it. Theo works in structural structural engineering, and he has this habit of going very still and very quiet when he's angry on my behalf, stiller than when he's angry for himself. Play doctor, he repeated back to me, flat. I know, 6 years, Noelle, I know. At some point around 3 a.m., he got up and made me tea. I didn't drink, and we sat at the kitchen table going in circles. Should I call my mother back tonight? Should I let it sit? Was there some version of this where Callum found another cosigner and I never had to think about it again? Around 4:15, I finally said out loud the thing I'd been avoiding all night, that some part of me was scared this was just the newest version of something that had been happening my whole childhood. My needs quietly reclassified as optional whenever Callum needed something urgently. Theo didn't try to talk me out of the feeling. He just said, "That sounds like a pattern worth actually looking at, not just this once," and went quiet again. He didn't tell me what to do about the loan itself. He just held my hand across the table and said, "Whatever this loan is, don't sign anything until you've read every page twice, and don't read it alone." I didn't think much of that advice at the time. I thought he meant it generally, the way you'd tell anyone not to sign a big loan blind. I didn't know yet how literal that warning would turn out to be, or how much reading I'd end up doing. 2 days later, before I'd given my mother any answer at all, I sat down to fill out my own private loan application to cover the gap in tuition the scholarship didn't touch, $9,400 a year for 4 years. The online portal for Sally Mae asked me to authorize a hard credit pull, which I did, expecting nothing unusual, because I have never in my life missed a payment on anything. The application stalled. A red banner appeared. "We were unable to verify your identity based on the information provided. Please contact our fraud verification line." I figured it was a glitch, a typo in my address maybe, or an old employer that didn't match. I called the number. I sat on hold for 11 minutes listening to hold music that looped every 90 seconds, and when a representative finally picked up, she asked me to confirm my identity. By verifying an account, she read off her screen. Twin Rivers Credit Union business line of credit opened 14 months ago. Current balance $19,420. Can you confirm the original credit limit on that account? I don't have a business account at Twin Rivers, I said. I've never even been inside a Twin Rivers branch. There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause that tells you the person on the other end has heard this sentence before and knows exactly what it means. "Ma'am, I'd strongly recommend you pull a full credit report today and consider placing a fraud alert," she said. "This account is what's flagging your identity verification. It's tied to your social security number." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, hands cold, and pulled my full report from all 3 bureaus. It took 11 minutes to load. When it did, there it was, in a section I genuinely never had reason to scroll to before, because I'd never had a delinquent account in my life. Twin Rivers Credit Union, business line of credit, opened 04/17. Original limit $28,750. Current balance $19,420. Status 90+ days delinquent, sent to collections. I didn't recognize the account. I didn't recognize the opening date, but I recognized April of the previous year, because that was the same month my brother Callum had launched his food truck, Ferris Fire, the one that had folded after 7 months, and that nobody in my family had ever really explained the ending of. I called Theo at work and I could barely get the words out in order. He left early. By the time he got home, I had printed the credit report, all 19 pages of it, spread across the kitchen table like evidence in a case I didn't yet know I was building. "There's a signature page," I said, flipping to it. "There's an actual signature page, Theo. Somebody signed my name." He looked at it for a long time without saying anything. The signature on the loan agreement was close, closer than I wanted it to be. A rounded N, a looping L at the end, but the crossbar on my capital F leaned the wrong direction. I've signed my own name probably 40,000 times in my life. I know exactly how the F leans. This one didn't. "We're calling a lawyer tomorrow," Theo said. "Tonight, we're calling the credit union." Twin Rivers fraud department was closed for the day, so I called the collections agency listed on the delinquent notice instead, a company called Halston Recovery Group, and asked what the funds from the line of credit had been used for. The woman on the phone told me she couldn't share full transaction details without a police report, but she could confirm one thing. The initial $28,750 draw had gone out in a single disbursement 3 days after the account opened to a vendor called Coastal Fleet and Equipment Leasing. I looked it up while she was still on the line. Coastal Fleet and Equipment Leasing specializes in commercial food truck build-outs. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in bed doing math in my head. $28,750 draw, $19,420 remaining balance, which meant somebody had made payments for a while before stopping, which meant somebody had known about this account for over a year and let it quietly rot in my credit history without telling me a single word. I thought about every conversation I'd had with my brother in the past 14 months. I thought about the dinner where he'd announced the food truck was folding and said vaguely, "Financing fell through, it happens," and how my mother had patted his hand and said, "You'll bounce back, you always do," and how nobody had asked a single follow-up question. And now I understood why. Because 2 of the people at that table already knew exactly where the financing had come from. I called out of my shift the next morning for the first time in 3 years. I drove to Twin Rivers Credit Union in person instead of calling, because I wanted to watch someone's face while they told me what they knew. The fraud investigator, a woman named Priscilla Ashford, pulled the account file and turned her monitor slightly so I could see it too. The account application lists your employer as Grandview Medical Center, your correct date of birth, your correct social, she said. Whoever filled this out had accurate personal information about you. That's actually common in cases involving family members. It's rarely a stranger. messenger. Was there a notary on the signature page? I asked, because I'd seen a stamp in the corner of the loan agreement, small and circular, and hadn't looked closely enough the night before. She zoomed in. The stamp read, Sandra M. Delgado, Notary Public, State of Ohio, commission expires 2027. Sandra Delgado, my father's co-worker of 22 years, the woman who did my parents' notarizations for free out of her kitchen because she'd gotten her commission for convenience and never charged family friends. The woman who had cried at my baptism, according to my mother, though I have no memory of that because I was an infant. Theo drove me to the credit union that day because I was shaking too badly to trust myself behind the wheel. On the way home, I called Callum. I didn't plan what I was going to say. It just came out. Did you know there's a Twin Rivers business line of credit in my name? There was a silence on the line that lasted just long enough to answer the question before he even opened his mouth. Noelle, it's not what you— Did you know, I said again, that somebody opened a $28,750 credit line using my social security number and a forged signature to fund your food truck? I was going to pay it back, he said. I've been paying it back. Some months. I got behind when the truck folded. I was going to catch up before you— Before I what, Callum? Before I found out you'd been stealing my identity for over a year? It's not stealing if it's family, he said. And I remember pulling the phone away from my ear and just staring at it because I genuinely could not process that sentence as something a grown adult had said out loud with a straight face. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the passenger seat with the phone still warm in my hand, and Theo reached over and just held my other hand the rest of the way home, not saying anything, because there wasn't really anything to say yet. 2 nights after that call, unable to sleep again, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I logged into the shared family cloud drive my late grandmother had set up years ago for photos and old documents, one I still had access to because nobody had ever bothered to remove me. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just scrolling, the way you do at 1 a.m. when your hands need something to do. In a folder labeled Estate, Grandma Ruth, I found a scanned letter from 2019, 3 years before she passed, addressed to my mother, laying out how she wanted her modest life insurance payout split, $22,000, held in a designated account for my education. When Noelle is ready to go back to school, she's always talked about it, and $22,000 to Callum with no restrictions attached, for whatever he needs to get on his feet. I sat with that for a long time before I understood what I was actually looking at. My grandmother had died 4 years earlier. I had never seen a cent of that $22,000, and I had never once been told it existed. I called the funeral home's attorney of record the next morning, a man named Desmond Whitlock, who'd handled the estate, and after some hesitation about client confidentiality that Priscilla and Nguyen later helped me push past with a formal records request, he confirmed the account had been disbursed in full to my mother as executor, 6 months after my grandmother's death, the same year it turned out that the Ferris Fire food truck first opened. I never found a clean paper trail proving my $22,000 specifically funded the truck. What I found instead, going through old bank statements Priscilla subpoenaed as part of the broader fraud case, was a single wire transfer, $21,600, out of the estate account and into my mother's personal checking, dated 11 days before Callum's first equipment deposit at Coastal Fleet and Equipment Leasing. My mother had never told me my grandmother left me anything at all. For 4 years, as far as I knew, there had been nothing. That was the detail that broke something loose in me that the forged signature hadn't quite managed to. The credit line felt like theft. This felt like erasure, like I'd been quietly written out of my own grandmother's last wishes, and nobody in my family had thought it worth mentioning. Not once, not even in passing. I didn't confront my parents that week. I know that probably sounds strange, given everything, but I wanted to understand the whole shape of it before I said a word to anyone else in the family, because I'd already learned in 29 years of being Marjorie Ferris's daughter that if you go to her with half a story, she rewrites the other half before you've finished your sentence. I hired an attorney, Priscilla Nguyen, who specialized in identity theft and financial fraud cases, recommended by Priscilla Ashford at the credit union of all the small coincidences. Priscilla Nguyen's office was above a dry cleaners on Far Hills Avenue, and her first question, before anything else, was whether I wanted this handled as a family matter or a legal matter, because those were, she said, 2 very different roads, and once you're on the legal one, you generally can't hop back to the other. I want to know the full scope first, I told her. Then I'll decide. She filed a police report with me the same afternoon at the Kettering PD, where a detective named Renata Cole took my statement in a small interview room that smelled like old coffee and dry erase marker. Detective Cole had a legal pad instead of a laptop, and she wrote everything longhand, asking me to walk through it 3 separate times from 3 different angles, once chronologically, once just the numbers, once just the people, which she explained was how she caught inconsistencies, though she said mine held together the same way each time, which she noted almost like a compliment. She told me identity theft between family members was, unfortunately, one of the most common and hardest to prosecute categories they saw, because juries and even judges sometimes assume it can't be that serious if it's blood. She said it without any judgment in her voice, just fact, the way you'd tell someone the weather. She also told me something I didn't expect, that in her 9 years working financial crimes, the cases that actually held up in court were almost never the ones where the victim confronted the family first. The ones who talked to their family before they've built the paper trail, she said, usually end up with a family member who's had time to get their story straight. Document first, confront last. I know that's the harder order emotion emotionally. It's the one that actually works. I didn't fully understand how much I needed that advice until later, but I held on to it for the next 3 weeks like a rope. Priscilla Nguyen also brought in a forensic document examiner, a soft-spoken man named Warren Yoshida, who'd spent 20 years testifying in fraud cases across 3 states. I sat in his office while he laid my actual signature, pulled from my nursing license, my mortgage documents, my passport, next to the signature on the Twin Rivers loan agreement, under a lamp with a magnifying loupe. The pressure pattern is inconsistent with your genuine signature, he said, tracing a line with a gloved finger. Your real F has a downward-leaning crossbar consistently. Across 11 samples spanning 9 years, this F leans upward. And here, he pointed to a faint indentation near the bottom margin, there's a tracing artifact. Someone laid your real signature underneath this page and traced the outline through the paper. It's not a perfect match because tracing rarely is, but it's close enough to fool someone who isn't looking carefully. A bank teller processing 40 applications a day, for instance. I asked him if he could tell how long it would have taken someone to do that. He said, given the level of care, probably 20 or 30 minutes of practice beforehand. I thought about who in my family had 30 spare minutes and easy access to a document with my real signature on it. I thought about the folder of family paperwork my mother keeps in the hall closet at her house. Copies of everyone's IDs in case of emergency, she always said, and a Christmas card I'd signed the year before. The one still sitting in a shoebox on her closet shelf because my mother keeps every card anyone's ever given her. Sandra Delgado didn't answer my calls, so I drove to her house on a Saturday. She's 71, lives alone since her husband passed, keeps a garden of dahlias that my father has always admired. She opened the door in gloves and dirt on her knees from weeding, and when she saw my face, hers went pale before I'd said a single word. Noelle, she said. I didn't. Marjorie told me you'd already seen and signed it. She said you were in a hurry, working a shift, and asked me to just notarize it as a favor since I already had the paperwork from the food truck loan the year before. I've known your family 30 years. I had no reason to think, was I in the room, Sandra? She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said very softly, no, you weren't in the room. That's a felony. Notarizing a document without the signer physically present, and she knew at the moment the sentence left her mouth, because her hands started shaking around the gloves she was still holding. I told her I wasn't there to yell at her. I told her I needed to know one thing. Had this happened before, the year prior, with the original food truck loan too? She nodded. She said Marjorie had told her the same thing both times, that Noelle already signed. Noelle's just impossible to reach during hospital shifts. Could Sandra please just notarize it as a family favor so the loan wouldn't miss its closing window? Both times, 14 months apart. 2 separate fraudulent notarizations, 2 separate loans, one my brother's failed food truck, and I would learn within the week. The second one already in motion for the restaurant, sitting in a drawer at First Meridian Bank waiting for a cosigner. I want to make this right, Sandra said, and I believed that she meant it, even as I understood it couldn't actually be made right, not in any simple sense. Tell me what to do. Talk to my attorney, I said. Truthfully, that's the only thing that helps at this point. I gave her Priscilla Nguyen's card, and she called within the hour, according to Priscilla, and gave a full written statement the following Tuesday. The same statement that would later become the single most damaging piece of evidence against my mother. More damaging even than Warren Yoshida's forensic report, because it wasn't just physical analysis of ink and pressure. It was a person who'd known my family for 30 years on record saying, I was told the daughter had already signed. She had not. Warren Yoshida's final written report ran to 11 pages, dense with terminology I had to have explained to me twice. Stroke velocity, pen lift patterns, baseline slant consistency, but the summary paragraph was the part I read over and over. In my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of forensic certainty, the questioned signature on both the Twin Rivers Credit Union agreement dated April 17th and the pending First Meridian SBA guarantor documents was not produced by the same hand as the 11 known exemplars provided. The questioned signatures exhibit characteristics consistent with simulation by tracing both loans, not just the one I'd already found. My mother, it turned out, had already had Sandra pre-notarize the restaurant loans guarantor page too, weeks before that dinner where she'd slid the forms across the table and asked me, so casually, to just sign. I want to talk about the week after that, because it wasn't one dramatic scene. It was small, grinding things. It was me sitting across from Priscilla Nguyen going through 14 months of bank statements Twin Rivers released under subpoena, watching the payment pattern. 4 months of on-time $412 payments from an account with my brother's initials on the memo line, then nothing. Then a single $600 payment 8 months later that Detective Cole's investigation later traced to a personal loan Callum had taken out from a payday lender under his own name, meaning he'd gone into worse debt trying to, quietly cover the gap on the debt he'd put in mine, rather than tell me it existed. It was a call from my Aunt Colleen, my mother's sister, who I hadn't told anything yet, saying she'd heard there was some drama with the loan stuff, and could I please not make things ugly before Callum's opening, which told me my mother had already started managing the narrative before I'd said a single public word. It was 3 sleepless nights where I sat up with my laptop, cross-referencing the SBA loan application my mother had first shown me, the $340,000 restaurant loan for the space on Wyoming Street, against the food truck debt, and realizing the SBA application listed me as guarantor with a projected annual income that assumed I was still working full-time as a phlebotomist, no mention anywhere of medical school, because as far as that loan paperwork was concerned, on paper paper, in numbers, in the future my family had already written for me without asking. I wasn't going. One of those nights, around 1 a.m., I actually picked up the phone to call my mother. No plan, no script, just an ache to hear her explain herself before I had all the pieces. She answered on the second ring, sounding awake, and for one strange, hopeful second, I thought maybe she'd been lying there thinking about it too, working up to calling me first. "Noelle, it's late," she said instead. "Is this about the restaurant? Because Ken needs an answer by Friday, and I really don't have the energy for another fight tonight." I hung up without saying anything. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time afterward, and that was the moment I stopped hoping this would resolve itself through a conversation, and started instead treating it like the case it actually was. In between all of this, ordinary life kept happening in a way that felt almost offensive. I still had shifts to work. I still had a wedding to half plan with Theo, a wedding I'd started to seriously wonder whether my mother would even attend at this point. One Sunday, my cousin Delphine called just to talk about nothing, a new apartment she was looking at, a guy she'd matched with, and 40 minutes into the call, she said carefully, "I heard there's some kind of mess with the restaurant loan. Aunt Marjorie said you're being difficult about signing something." I didn't correct her right then. I just said I'd tell her the real version soon, and I hung up, feeling the particular loneliness of watching a story about yourself get told wrong to people who love you, in real time, by someone who wasn't even in the room for any of it. There was one night, about 2.5 weeks in, where I almost signed the paperwork anyway. My mother called and asked me to come to dinner, said it was just family, said Callum wanted to clear the air. I went because some small, tired part of me still wanted this to be fixable with a conversation. She'd printed the SBA cosigner forms and set them at my place at the table, next to my plate, like a party favor. Callum sat across from me, looking smaller than I remembered, said he was sorry, said he'd pay back every cent of the food truck debt, said the restaurant was his real shot and he needed me. And for about 4 minutes, watching him get choked up over his water glass, I picked up the pen my mother had also set out. Theo, who'd come with me and been sitting quiet the whole meal, put his hand flat on the paper before I could sign it. "Not tonight," he said, calm, not raising his voice at all. "She's not signing anything without her attorney reviewing it first. That's not negotiable." My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do before. A flash of pure irritation, gone almost as fast as it appeared, replaced by that practiced, reasonable tone. "Theo, this is a family matter. There's an open police report," Theo said. "It stopped being just a family matter the day somebody forged her signature." The table went silent. My father, for the first time in this whole ordeal, actually looked up from his plate and looked at me. Really looked, like he was seeing something for the first time. My mother recovered fast, though. She does that. Recovers fast. Always has. "Fine," she said, sliding the papers back toward herself, voice gone brittle and formal. "Fine. I hope you understand what you're doing to this family over paperwork, Noelle. I hope you understand that." Callum didn't say anything at all. He just stared at his plate, jaw working, and I remember thinking, watching him, that some part of him already knew this was ending badly and had known it for a while and had let it happen anyway because it was easier than being the one to stop it. I put the pen down. I left 20 minutes later without eating dessert, and in the car, Theo said, "I know that wasn't easy," and I cried the whole way home, not because I regretted not signing, but because some part of me had wanted, so badly, for it to just be that easy, for a conversation and an apology to be enough. It wasn't going to be enough. I knew that now. The confrontation I'd been quietly building toward happened 3 weeks later, and not the way I expected. I hadn't planned to do it in public. I'd planned to sit my parents down privately with Priscilla and Nguyen present, but Callum forced the timeline by scheduling a friends and family soft opening for the restaurant, Ferris and Vine, 2 nights before the SBA loan was set to formally close. A tasting event for about 40 people, extended family, a few investors, the loan officer from First Meridian himself, a man named Ken Ashby, who I hadn't met but who I'd read plenty about by then in the paperwork. My mother texted me the invitation like nothing had happened. Soft opening Thursday 6 p.m. would mean a lot if you came. Wear something nice. Bring Theo. I went. I brought Theo. I also brought Dr. Anita Cho, my ER attending, and the person who'd written my strongest recommendation letter for Wright State, because I told her the whole story 2 days before over coffee, and she'd said, without hesitation, "If you need someone in that room who isn't blood and isn't going to back down, I'll come." I also brought a folder. The restaurant smelled like garlic and fresh basil when we walked in, string lights across the exposed brick, 40-some people with wine glasses admiring the space my mother had helped decorate. Callum was working the room in a chef's coat he hadn't earned the right to wear yet, in my opinion, though I kept that thought to myself. Ken Ashby, the loan officer, stood near the bar in a gray suit, clipboard tucked under his arm, waiting to collect signatures once the mingling wound down. My mother found me near the appetizer table. "I'm so glad you came," she said, and reached to hug me, and I let her, because Dr. Cho was standing right beside me, and I wanted my mother to see exactly who I'd brought. "Marjorie," I said, "I need to introduce you to someone before Ken collects those signature pages tonight." Her smile flickered. "Noelle, this really isn't the Mr. Ashby," I said, raising my voice slightly, enough that 3 or 4 nearby conversations paused. "Before you finalize anything tonight, I need you to know that the previous business loan connected to this family, the Twin Rivers line of credit for the food truck, was opened using a forged signature and a fraudulently notarized document with my identity. There's an open police report with Detective Renata Cole at Kettering PD, case number 24-11487. I have a forensic document examination confirming the forgery. I am not, and will not be, co-signing tonight's night's loan. The room did that thing rooms do when something true and ugly lands in the middle of it. A ripple of quiet, glasses lowering, my cousin Delphine's fork stopping halfway to her mouth, a caterer near the kitchen door pausing mid-step with a tray of stuffed mushrooms. Callum's business partner, a soft-spoken line cook named Preston Ndiaye, who'd put his own savings into the build-out, turned slowly to look at Callum with an expression I can only describe as dawning horror, like he was doing math he didn't want to finish. Ken Ashby's clipboard came down slowly. "I'm going to need to see that case number," he said, and I handed him a printed copy from my folder because I'd anticipated exactly this moment. My mother's face went through 4 distinct stages, and I watched every single one of them happen in real time. First, denial. That is not what happened. Noelle is confused. There was a miscommunication with the paperwork. Then, when Sandra Delgado, who'd been invited and was standing near the wine table looking like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards, wouldn't meet my mother's eyes, my mother pivoted to minimizing. "Even if there was some mix-up with signatures, it's family money. It's not like we stole from a stranger. This is what families do for each other. You're being dramatic. This is your brother's whole future. You're ruining over paperwork." Then, blame shifting, aimed at me now instead of the situation. "You've always resented Callum ever since you were kids. You've always thought you were better than the rest of us because of your fancy degree plans. This is about your ego, not the loan." I let her get all the way through that sentence before I opened the folder again and pulled out the printed bank statement showing the single disbursement to Coastal Fleet and Equipment Leasing and set it on the appetizer table in front of everyone still watching. "This is $28,150 that went out under my social security number, without my knowledge, to fund a food truck that failed in 7 months. I found out because my own student loan application got flagged for fraud. I'm not ruining anything, Mom. I'm the one who's been carrying debt I didn't know I had for 14 months. Somewhere behind me I heard Aunt Colleen exhale, a small sharp sound, like she hadn't actually believed it until she saw the dollar figure printed on paper. Then I pulled out the second document, the wire transfer confirmation, $21,600, from my grandmother's estate account into my mother's personal checking, 11 days before that first equipment deposit. "And this," I said, my voice unsteady for the first time all night, "is the $22,000 Grandma Ruth left specifically for my education. I never saw a dollar of it. I didn't even know it existed until 3 weeks ago." My father made a small sound beside me, almost a gasp, and I realized, watching his face, that this part, the estate money, was new information to him too. That's when Callum broke. He'd been standing near the bar, silent through the whole thing, chef's coat suddenly looking like a costume on him, and he set his wine glass down so hard it nearly cracked. "I didn't have a choice," he said, voice cracking. "The truck was already 3 months underwater when Mom said you'd never even notice. You're never home, you're always at the hospital or at class. She said it would be paid off before you ever had to know. You knew," I said quietly. "You knew, and you let it happen twice." Aunt Colleen tried to step in, said something about not airing family business in front of these people, gesturing vaguely at the investors, and Dr. Cho, and Dr. I. Cho, who I will love forever for this, said mildly, "I'm not these people. I'm the physician who wrote her recommendation letter. I'd say I have a pretty relevant seat at this table." Ken Ashby closed his clipboard. "First Meridian will be pausing this loan pending our own internal review," he said, professionally, quietly, already halfway to the door. "Given the fraud allegations connected to a prior loan involving the same guarantor's information, I can't in good conscience finalize tonight." My father, who hadn't said one word through the entire confrontation, finally spoke. His voice was low, and it cracked in a way I'd never heard it crack before. "Marjorie, is this true? Did you have Sandra notarize something without Noelle in the room?" My mother's mouth opened, and closed, and opened again. "Walter, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Callum needed—" "That's not what I asked you," my father said, louder now, loud enough that a couple near the window turned fully around in their chairs. "I asked you if it's true." There was a long pause, long enough that I could hear the string lights buzzing faintly overhead, and someone's phone notification go off somewhere near the bar. Sandra Delgado, still standing by the wine table, said quietly, into that silence, "It's true, Walter. I'm sorry. I should never have agreed to it." My mother turned to look at her, something sharp and betrayed flashing across her face, as if Sandra confirming the truth were itself the disloyalty, rather than the thing Sandra was confirming. My mother didn't answer my father directly. She just stood there, in the middle of the restaurant she'd helped design, in front of 40 people, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched Marjorie Ferris run out of a next sentence. She set down her wine glass on the appetizer table, next to my folder, and walked out through the front door without a coat, into the parking lot, and my father followed her a minute later, and Callum sank into a chair at an empty two-top and put his head in his hands while Preston Ndiaye stood over him, not saying anything at all. I want to tell you it all resolved cleanly after that. It didn't, not entirely, and I think that's actually the more honest ending. 3 years have passed since that night. I'm a second-year resident now in emergency medicine at a hospital 40 minutes from where I grew up, close enough to visit, far enough that I chose the distance on purpose. The Twin Rivers debt was legally reversed once the fraud was confirmed through Warren Yoshida's report and Detective Cole's investigation. Sandra Delgado surrendered her notary commission and paid a fine, though the state notary board's disciplinary case against her technically remains open on a related complaint about an unrelated document from years earlier, still sitting unresolved on some regulator's desk, which is its own strange, loose thread I never fully understood and never chased down. Callum did not go to prison prison. Priscilla Nguyen and I ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges against him personally. His name wasn't the one forged on the page. And honestly, some tired, complicated part of me still didn't want to be the reason my brother had a record. He took out a much smaller personal loan under his own name and credit alone. No restaurant, no Ferris and Vine. Just a food cart, licensed properly this time, parked outside a brewery on weekends. I've heard from cousins it's doing okay. I haven't been. My father paid back a portion of the remaining collections balance himself, quietly, without my mother's knowledge at first, which is the one thing in this whole story that still makes my throat tight when I think about it. He also, without me asking, tracked down the $21,600 from my grandmother's estate through his own retirement account and had Priscilla Nguyen draft the transfer formally, with paperwork, so there could never be a version of this story again where anyone denied it happened. He didn't explain it or make a speech about it. He just handed me the confirmation printout one afternoon in the Grandview parking lot and said, "This one was never supposed to be a question," and got back in his truck before I could really respond. Preston and DI, Callum's old business partner, text me sometimes, mostly just to check in, mostly nothing to do with any of this anymore. He pulled his savings out of the restaurant deal the same week as the soft opening and eventually opened his own small sandwich shop 2 towns over, which I've visited exactly once, quietly, on a day off, and did not tell my mother about. My mother and I speak maybe 4 times a year now. She has never said the words, "I forged your signature," or "I'm sorry," but she said once, at Thanksgiving the following year, standing at that same stove with the same wooden spoon, was, "I did what I thought a mother needed to do for her son. I know you're still angry about it." That's the closest I've gotten. And some days I've made a kind of uneasy peace with the fact that it might be the closest I ever get. Last month I was on shift when a woman came in with her college-aged daughter. Some minor sports injury, nothing serious. And while I was setting the girl's wrist, I heard the mother on the phone in the hallway telling someone, "She's finally seeing a real doctor. This is going to cost me," in this tone, half joking, half not. And I had to step out for a second before I went back in, because it landed somewhere I didn't expect it to. I finished the shift. I always finish the shift. Delphine and I are close again. Closer than we were before any of this, actually. She was the one relative who called me the week after the soft opening, not to relitigate who said what, but just to say, "I believe you, and I'm sorry it took me a minute." Aunt Colleen and I are civil, nothing more, and I've made peace with that being the ceiling for now. Callum and I have spoken exactly twice since that night. Once at our grandfather's funeral the following spring, a short, stiff conversation in a church parking lot about nothing in particular, and once when he texted me, unprompted, on the anniversary of the confrontation, just 3 words, "I'm still sorry." I didn't write back right away. I did, eventually, 3 days later, just, "I know, take care of yourself." That's where we've left it. I don't know if that's an ending or just where this particular thread happens to sit for now. I still keep the printed credit report in a folder in my desk drawer, the original 19 pages, slightly yellowed now at the edges. I don't know exactly why I've kept it. Theo says it's because some part of me still needs proof. On the days the whole thing starts to feel like something I made up. Maybe he's right. There's a photo I keep next to it too. Me in my white coat at Wright State orientation. The same week the restaurant would have opened in the version of my life where I'd signed that paper at the table. Judith Okafor, my old pre-med advisor at Sinclair, still emails me every August. The same week I started night classes 6 years before any of this happened. Just a one-line check-in. "Still proud of you, Dr. Ferris-to-be. How's the fight going?" I've never fully explained to her what the fight turned out to mean, beyond exams and exhaustion and the MCAT. And some years I write back a paragraph, and some years I just send back a photo of whatever I'm doing that week. A suture kit, a code cart, once a very tired selfie at 4 a.m. post-call. She always writes back the same 3 words. "Keep going, kid." Married life with Theo is ordinary now, in a way I used to think I'd never get to have. We finally had that wedding. Small, at a park pavilion. My father walked me down the aisle, and my mother sat in the second row and did not give a toast. And nobody made it strange. We just let that be what it was. He still reads every document I sign twice before I do, a habit neither of us has ever tried to break. I think about the version of that Thursday night where I didn't say anything, where I let Ken Ashby collect the signatures and went home and started medical school anyway, while quietly drowning under debt nobody admitted existed. I think about how close I actually came to that version, the night at the dinner table with a pen already in my hand. It's a strange thing, realizing the version of your life you almost lived was sitting one signature away the whole time, and the only thing standing between you and it was a hand flat on a piece of paper saying, "Not tonight." Anyway, that's the whole thing, or as much of it as I've ever told anyone outside a courtroom. If you're going through something even a little bit like this, I hope you find your Theo, your Priscilla, your Warren Yoshida with his little magnifying loupe, somebody who looks closely enough to see the crossbar leaning the wrong way. It's out there. It found me.